Il prossimo 7 ottobre il Castello di Rivoli inaugura la prima grande retrospettiva dedicata all'artista americano-iracheno Michael Rakowitz. La mostra co-curata dal Castello di Rivoli assieme alla Whitechapel, dove ha aperto lo scorso giugno, itinererà nella primavera del 2020 al Jamel Art Center di Dubai. Michael Rakowitz è un artista, scultore, disegnatore, ricercatore, a volte anche chef. È un instancabile narratore che attraverso le sue cosiddette sculture sociali dà voce ai temi della modernità, come la povertà, le diaspore della modernizzazione, del colonialismo e della globalizzazione. Prende parte tuttora a grandi importanti rassegne internazionali, è presente in mostre di istituzioni come Documenta 13, il PS1 MoMA, Mass MoCA e il Castello di Rivoli, la 16ª Biennale di Sydney, la 10ª Biennale di Istanbul, l'8ª Biennale di Sharjah, la Biennale di Tirana, transmediale tra le varie. Nel 2018 ha vinto il Fort Flint di Londra e ha installato a Trafalgar Square una scultura tratta dal suo lavoro The Invisible Enemy Should Not Exist, un'opera tuttora in corso. Bene, ci troviamo qui con Michael. Hi Mike.
Hi, nice to be here.
Welcome. So, la tua storia, le tue origini sembrano essere il tessuto narrativo di molto del tuo lavoro. Il tema del viaggio, l'esodo, la migrazione hanno un ruolo importante. Vorrei che mi raccontassi da dove viene questo e che importanza ha la memoria personale nel tuo vissuto e nella tua pratica. So, your story, your origins seems to be the narrative background of your practice. Your journey, the exodus, the concept of a migration have an important role in your work. I would like to ask you where your story comes from and how is important this personal memory in your practice.
Well, I think that there was always a kind of understanding in contemporary art that one tries to suppress that personal story a bit, that there's, I don't know, some kind of danger or even disdain for biography. And so there were ways in which my work was always dealing with this idea of migration or displacement, and maybe doing it in a way where it was a little more embedded in some other kind of approximation of how to distill it. For instance, a project like Parasite, where I construct these custom-built inflatable shelters for homeless people that attach to the ventilation on buildings. This kind of focus on homelessness, this of being without a place, is something that was appealing to me through the lens of architecture, but also came to fruition really as an idea when I went to Jordan on an architectural residency when I was studying at MIT, and it was a visual arts program that was in a department of architecture. So everything always seemed to be, a step removed, the art that I was doing was not architecture, but it was dealing with architecture. And Jordan is not Iraq, but it was the closest I was able to get to Iraq, where my mother's family was from, and which they had to leave in the 1940s. And my grandparents had made Iraq available to us basically through their own version of installation art. What was on the floor was from Baghdad. The carpets and what was on the wall was from Baghdad, and what was coming from the radio or the reel-to-reel tapes that they would play during family gatherings was from Baghdad, and what was coming out of the kitchen was definitely from Baghdad, the smells and everything. And so, but this was just life, this was very normal to me, and I didn't really quite know, how to speak about it, or if I should be speaking about it through my work. But it was John Jonas at MIT who came to my studio and saw one of the shelters that I was building for one of the homeless people that I was working with in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And as I was talking to her about it, she said, you realize that there's a transaction here. You've built the shelter, but you've also built a story. You built architecture, but you've also made portraiture. And that this is the wandering Jew, and that you have permission to storytell.
Oh.
And that was it. I think that's what really kind of shifted my practice in a way, was this really important visit from an artist that I adore. Being able to kind of zero in on something that she saw as not necessarily performative, but as the social. And that the consequence of moving around really builds these social environments that we come to and we leave, but both sides are always changed in those interactions.
This issue brings me to the next question actually. Un aspetto interessante del tuo lavoro è che spesso è il risultato appunto di un processo di partecipazione e di condivisione, come hai anche un po' raccontato, una condivisione di esperienze, no? Che vivi anche nei luoghi dove ti trovi a lavorare. Mi piacerebbe che mi raccontassi un po' quanto è importante questa idea di condivisione e di partecipazione. Another interesting aspect of your work that is referring to what you just previously told us, it's taking into the account the process of participation, the participatory process and sharing of experience. The idea that you deal with the community of the specific place you are invited to work. For example, also the storytelling practice for The Enemy Should Not Exist, or the history of the Armenian, for example, that in The Flesh is Yours, the Bones Are Ours. So I would like to ask you to describe a little bit how the participatory practice and storytelling come in your practice as well.
Well, I think that there's always an awareness that I have that an artwork is always being built, and it's always being made. It's continuously being sculpted by the people that are looking at it and engaging with it. So long after something is made, it's always changing in our perceptions, and it's always giving us things, and hopefully we're giving it something as well as viewers. And it's a little bit like a valley that gets carved by the wind or the water over thousands of years. And as I've made work, I've realized that oftentimes the things that go wrong, or the things that I, like early on when things were affecting my work that I couldn't control, that those were ultimately much more interesting things that were happening to the work than what I thought it should be. And this was a very early lesson, back in art school. And I really embraced it because I found it so interesting that it built the aura into the work. And in a way, I started to recognize the fact that it was like the same thing that was happening between, say, like a master and an apprentice. That like there's the mold, and then there's the cast that comes from the mold, and there's a transmission of information. And I wanted to build that into the work that I did, so that the work, in a way, like me, is always learning. And it can only learn through multiple hands. And so there's a few different things that are going on in what you brought up, which is about the participation. And the participation is really important because I'll go into scenarios like the project in Istanbul with The Flesh is Yours, the Bones Are Ours. And I can go in with a really flattened idea of how something like the history of the Armenians in Turkey is spoken about, and how it's also not spoken about, how it's denied in terms of the refusal to acknowledge something like the Armenian genocide. But what I can never know was the fact that when you look at Istanbul and you see how beautiful it is, it's because of the traces of the fingers and the hands of the Armenian craftsmen, the Kurdish craftsmen, the Greek craftsmen, who shaped the Art Nouveau friezes that you see over the doorways and on the architecture that was built in the aftermath of the fire in Para in the 1870s and then the earthquake in the 1890s. And that gives me an opportunity to dive even deeper into the fact that, like, there's this really beautiful story about this Turkish craftsman named Kemal Cimbis, who was an apprentice to an Armenian master craftsman who was able to do all those plaster motifs. And it does two things. It complicates the story about who's listening to whom. But it also creates a moment where he then transmits to me the techniques and the kind of vision that he learned from his Armenian master Garabet Chazarlian, so that together we're able to push against these forces that try to interrupt those transmissions of craft. Because when you transmit the craft, you're also transmitting, cultural information, and you're allowing for things to survive.
Yeah.
So it pushes against cultural amnesia. And the only way that I think you can really push against that is by inviting in multiple voices. And I don't have those voices in the places that I go to. And so I try to be in conversation with them, and I try to slow the clock down so that there's places where other people can come in and, like I said, sculpt the work.
This idea of multiple voices bring to the attention another issue, which is the fragment. Per l'apertura della villa di Francesco Federico Cerruti hai realizzato un omaggio a Cerruti che ha ispirato proprio la storia del filantropo torinese, che consiste nella rilegatura di un libro di preghiere, un libro mincia, che hai rilegato grazie a un'operazione di perfect binding, di rilegatura perfetta. A proposito di questo volevo proprio citare una tua frase che per me è molto poetica, in cui dici, a proposito della rilegatura, che nel riparare il libro le parole sono ricostruite e la costola del libro passa dalla cucitura che prima la teneva insieme alla colla che rinnova la vicinanza delle pagine l'un l'altra. Ciò che era danneggiato e slegato, composto di frammenti, torna a essere un oggetto integro. Il libro danneggiato, con i suoi tagli, metafora di traumi e ferite, viene ricucito attraverso un processo terapeutico di ricomposizione. Ecco, questo atto della ricostruzione porta all'attenzione il tema del frammento, che è presente in più forme nel tuo lavoro. You have realized on the occasion of the opening of the Villa Cerruti an homage to the philanthropist Francesco Federico Cerruti. This work consists in repairing a book, a Mincia prayer book, through a process of perfect binding. And I would like to quote yourself. You say something that is very poetic, and saying that in repairing this book, the words are restored. The damaged book, which with its cut, is a metaphor of traumas and wounds, and it is finally sewn up through a therapeutic process of recomposition. A book within the book that exhibits the wounds of the unbound pages whilst being simultaneously put back together. So I would like to ask you, how important is the concept of fragment and the concept of recovering fragments in your practice?
The fragment is important because it's always the displaced body in a way. It's always the body that's in motion, that's been jettisoned from the place where it came from, even if it's just a couple of feet away from where it's fallen from. And you've said it really nicely, the idea that one can simultaneously put something back together, but also show that it's still broken, that it came apart, is an important thing to me. And it goes back to something that one of my mentors, Christov-Bakargiev, the artist, says. And in his work, which has been an incredible influence on mine. He talks about the metaphor of the bandage, that a bandage does two things. It simultaneously heals the wound, but it's also very visible. One sees the bandage and sees that there is a wound. And if we follow that thinking all the way down to its finest point, we realize that in ideal society, people should not have bandages because they should not have wounds. But this idea that one can make something visible and simultaneously suture is a really important thing for me, because I think so much about amnesia and the way in which we risk the disappearance that anything ever went wrong. You know, that imperfection for me is really important, because the perfect is a myth, and there's danger in trying to make something pure or perfect. So the fragment for me does that. And when I'm reconstructing or reappearing the artifacts that were lost or destroyed in the aftermath of the Iraq War, whether it be the items that were looted from the museum in Iraq, the Iraq Museum, or whether it's the Lamassu that was destroyed at the Nergal-Gave in Nineveh, I'm always trying to make clear that these moments where things are actually being shattered are important to still see. In fact, when you look at the Lamassu, which is on the fourth plinth in Trafalgar Square in London, one of the things that I talk about is that what's exposed to the majority of Trafalgar Square is not the beautiful, colorful, winged bull. It's the back of it. And the back of it is being exposed because, first of all, I didn't want it facing so that it looks like it's going into a museum in Britain. It was important to me that it looks like it's finally leaving a museum in Britain, that it's facing southeast towards Nineveh, and also facing towards Parliament and the Foreign Office, where the decision to make war was made. But it's also exposing part of the Lamassu that people are never supposed to see. The Lamassu is always supposed to be put up as a threshold against the wall, and so there was something that was invisible to the viewer. It was like a relief. It wasn't sculpture in the round. But what was on the back was a cuneiform inscription that was written by the craftspeople. That was a message between them, the king, and the divine. So it was like a prayer in a way to bless the city, to make sure that the Lamassu had its divining power. So that fragment that people see, it is a fragment. It lets you know that this object has been violently displaced from the place where it's supposed to be. And that it's a little bit like looking at a tooth that's been pulled from one's mouth. You have the beautiful enamel, but then you also have the underside, which is not so beautiful, which shows you that something has been removed. And so for me, when I'm working in the context of, say, the Cerruti collection and coming up with a context-specific work, to have this mincha prayer book. Mincha in Hebrew is the afternoon prayer. That it was very important to me in my conversation with Mr. Fagnola, when we were discussing how it was that this could be repaired in keeping the concept of what I was trying to get at. He was the one who suggested that we make a plexiglass spine so that you can see that it's been repaired. Not that it's perfect, but it's been repaired. And so for me, he really understood in a way the kinds of stories that I wanted the objects to still be able to tell about their own traumas and their own journeys.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's so inspiring. Potete vedere il lavoro, l'omaggio a Cerruti al momento al Castello di Rivoli, e invece la sua retrospettiva aprirà, ricordo, il 7 ottobre prossimo. Vi aspettiamo. Grazie. Thank you, Michael.
Grazie.